Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, or good morning for those who are joining us from Europe. And thank you so much for participating in the PBEC Annual Dialogue Summit for 2022. I'm delighted now to move on to what is a new feature for us this year is one-to-one dialogues. And forgive me, I can do the maths, but we're going to have 3 in this session because it's a special session on Hong Kong. And there's so much to say positively about Hong Kong that I think the world needs to hear from leaders who are based here. And after this, we'll be going around the region. We have a session on Singapore, Australia, Vietnam, Philippines, and India for the first time. So we're really showing the love and want to hear from all the different countries' perspectives. But I'm delighted to now hand over the chair to Ben Simpfendorfer, who a lot of our PBEC members knows very well. It's fantastic to have him here, who's always hugely helpful in sharing his wonderful data sets on LinkedIn and in our private chats under Chatham House rules with PBEC. So over to you, Ben Simpfendorfer, Oliver Wyman partner. The floor is yours.
Michael, thank you very much. Congrats also on a fabulous start to the session. I hope you've all had a chance to dial in. The opening sessions really have been super informative. We are delighted, of course, though, to be able to talk about Hong Kong. The city is clearly at a turning point after a rough few years. We're beginning to open up, beginning to welcome colleagues and clients back into the city. I know I have a few myself walking around the office today, which is just so exciting. And so we do want to talk about some of the success stories that we expect to see over the coming few years. And I'm quite privileged, of course, today to have 2 guests who will be talking about this alongside me. And I'd like to introduce them now. The first is Diane Cho, founder and chairman of Dragon General Aviation Group, as well as Stephen Phillips, Director General of Investment Promotion at Invest Hong Kong. Welcome. We have you now for the next 40 minutes. So, Stephen, why don't we kick off with yourself? John Lee's speech, the Chief Executive's speech, was delivered, I think, just a little bit over a month ago. It was his first or maiden address. What were some of your key takeaways?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to join you all this afternoon or this morning, wherever you may be. You're right that we have a new chief executive in Hong Kong, John Lee, and he gave his first policy address just a month or so ago. But perhaps before I delve into some of the detail there, it's worth just stepping back a little bit. Going back to the 1st of July when President Xi Jinping visited Hong Kong, because I think he gave some incredibly important context for the international business community about the role of Hong Kong in the context of China, our country. And his first key message was that the one country, two systems formula works well not only for Hong Kong and Macau, but also for the country. And he went on to say that there's no reason to change that. I think that's incredibly important for businesses because the one country, two systems formula actually creates much of the uniqueness about Hong Kong in the context of China and indeed in the context of the region. The president also talked about central government supporting Hong Kong fully, how important the common law is in Hong Kong, again, something very important to the business community, and also the importance of Hong Kong's international connectivity, again, to the wider country. And I think this is partly to address perhaps some of the talk in certain circles that Hong Kong is just another Chinese city. I think President Xi was being very clear that Hong Kong's got this really distinct role to play in the context of China as a whole. That's also borne out in another plan that I'm sure not many people will have delved into, but the 14th five-year plan, for the first time ever, really carves out 8 distinct areas for Hong Kong in the context of the overall economic development of the country. So that's sort of the context of the policy address that John Lee gave just over a month ago. And that, I think, is very rich in content in terms of substance that's relevant to business. 2 areas he specifically talked about was Hong Kong being more aggressive and more helpful in terms of both attracting investment to Hong Kong, both international and from the mainland, and also attracting talent, high quality talent from all around the world. So 2 new units are being set up to achieve this. For the investors, there's the potential to have some form of incentives, which could range from land tax, typical incentives that you see in other jurisdictions. And then on the talent side, a whole range of new schemes to help bring in the quality talent that's needed in this very competitive environment. The policy address also talks very extensively about Hong Kong's sort of new directions, and that's particularly in the innovation and technology area, again with Hong Kong positioned as the international innovation and technology hub for the whole of the country. So this implies a two-way role, both into and out of the mainland. And we see some really exciting things happening if we look at AI, if we look at robotics, or if we look at life sciences. There's lots and lots more I could go on about, but maybe that just gives the general context about Hong Kong's positioning in the context of the country. And then that all fits slap bang geographically in the center of Asia. So Hong Kong's role for international businesses remains, we think, really pivotal for businesses looking to expand their footprint across the region. And lastly, put that into the context of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And I think in the next 5-10 years, we'll see a notable shift in trade and investment flows, much more north-south, intra-Asia-Pacific, not at the expense of, but to supplement the more traditional east-west flows.
Stephen, thanks very much. You touched on a number of points there that I thought were really striking, and they are the efforts to set up a number of strategic groups. We have one here on integration international development plans, so that's obviously an inbound, but also the outbound in terms of talents and service unit, the top talent pass scheme. So in a way, again, trying to make sure that we are not just a bridge between China and the world, but we take a far more strategic approach in terms of integrating with both China and the world and attracting the right sort of talent into the city. Do you feel that the city is at an inflection point? Do you feel that these are policies that have been we've seen before, or is this something new, something that we're breaking new ground here?
I really think this is breaking new ground. I think many of the policies are bold, and they're intentionally bold. As you mentioned in your opening remarks, Hong Kong has been through, like many places, a tough period with COVID, and before that, we had the social unrest here. And we know that Hong Kong needs to get back up there on the world stage, and that's what we're right in the process of doing. The senior leadership team are traveling around the world. They've been at APEC this week. So I think you will see more and more proactivity from Hong Kong. We've reduced the quarantine or eliminated the quarantine restrictions. There's just some simple testing now. And like you said, Ben, we're also seeing many, many more business visitors coming in to see us in Hong Kong. So really things are getting into the swing of business as usual in a way that we've not seen for the last 3 years.
You mentioned many of our leaders back out on the global stage. I thought that was particularly striking. I know we had a recent delegation out to the Middle East, Saudi Arabia in particular. I was super encouraged by that. I certainly have made a few trips to Dubai myself over the last few weeks. And Hong Kong's ties to the Middle East and the opportunities there have been something that personally I followed quite closely for the last 10, 15 years. And it seems to be that the region itself is at an inflection point. It's moved beyond trade investment. We're seeing fabulous developments across energy transition, across gaming, digital assets, climate and sustainability. And these are all opening up opportunities for Hong Kong in particular to again act as that bridge between capital, between business but between China and the Middle East. So it's really good to see our leaders making real efforts there. And there's reason, certainly in my view, to pay attention. Dubai is quite impressive. And over the last few years, it's come up not just as a copier or imitator of Hong Kong and Singapore, but a genuine competitor. And so it's been, encouraging to see the government come out with the type of policies that allow us to not only collaborate, but compete. Diana, could I ask you your views, again, as a business owner? What is sentiment like at the moment among Hong Kong business owners? Where is the sense of optimism towards the future, and where are people looking to double down?
Okay. Well, I think we all need to calibrate how we think. Before I was able to travel, the sentiment was pretty gloomy, let's put it that way. And when people start traveling and see the rest of the world, like Europe or North America, and compare to Hong Kong is still the best business environment to be in. And I personally changed my view after visiting all those different countries. And I came back and I looked at Hong Kong. Hong Kong still have the best infrastructure for anybody to invest in because it has very low tax. It's so easy to open a company. And especially if you want to access China, this is the best platform to do it. Because as a Hong Kong registered company, you can use zipper to go into China and get special tax breaks. And these are only available to Hong Kong companies. And you can be a foreign, 100% foreign national, but you own a Hong Kong company, and you can still use that avenue to invest in mainland China. And renminbi also, we use Hong Kong as a hub for trading in offshore renminbi. So you can have a contract with a company in mainland China, and they can pay you renminbi into Hong Kong accounts, and we can trade with the rest of the world. That's, it's the best platform. That's how I found it. And I have personally, and my company has benefited a lot being, stationed in Hong Kong. I mean, I do have offices in Malaysia and Singapore, but they don't have the same preferential treatment. Yeah.
It's hard to overlook that. Your point on the RMB is really very interesting. It's become a hot topic now, among many of the financial institutions, the need to both diversify away from the dollar, whether that's for political reasons or simply because of the recent dollar strength, right? It is quite tough in terms of whether you have funding obligations or other commitments. And that really sets Hong Kong up for success over the coming few years. And I also argue that as interest rates begin to move in favor of RMB funding relative to US dollar funding, and again, that hasn't been the case over the last 5-10 years, we could well see a real acceleration in Hong Kong's role as an offshore RMB hub. And certainly I would argue that no other hub has really managed to challenge Hong Kong's position, whether it's Singapore or London. There just isn't the scale or the depth of liquidity that you do get here in Hong Kong. So it is absolutely a super exciting opportunity. Stephen, I don't know, you might want to weigh in on the RMB specifically, but you mentioned ASEP earlier, which I thought was fascinating because, there really are only 3 world-class multilateral agreements under negotiation at the moment, and 2 of them are here in this region in Asia Pacific. The other, of course, is in North America. We have RCEP, we have CPTPP. RCEP, though, is of the more interest and the more progressed, if you like. For Hong Kong, we are a duty-free port, so I guess that the tariffs are of less interest, but there are some improvements there or gains in financial services. There is a growing emphasis on data sharing, all sorts of lovely stuff that Hong Kong likes to focus on in terms of professional services. Kind of interested in some of your reflections on RCEP and where you think the opportunities might be going forward.
Yeah, well, I think it's a fascinating question, obviously a very big question. I think there's the technical elements of what is a supersized free trade agreement, if you like. And then there's the more practical opportunities that I think will manifest from the overall envelope of the RCEP. And in many ways, I think Hong Kong is fortunate being almost at the geographic centre of the entire region. And so this sort of funneling effect of trade and investment, partly because of Hong Kong's role as such a major IFC, partly to the point you've been making about renminbi, all plays to Hong Kong having some stickiness, if you like, or being a participant in these trade and investment flows, which will be multi-directional. So I think for me, that is the way in which we're talking to the business community about looking where the opportunities are. Obviously, with each individual company, you get into more granular detail. There's a sort of subset within this, though, that I think is even more exciting. And that's when you look at Hong Kong in the context of one of those national development plans that you mentioned. And this is the region in southern China called Greater Bay Area, Hong Kong, Macau, and 9 cities in Guangdong. This is an area that has got 86 million people. You know, that makes it a large-sized country by any stretch of economic might. The economy already is about the 10th or so largest economy in the world. Many see it being maybe the 5th or 6th largest economy in the next 5 to 10 years. And Hong Kong, again, sitting as the sort of bridge between the two. I would just suggest that any business that isn't familiar with it, this is probably too big an opportunity to ignore. Or if you're going to ignore it, at least do it after you've done your homework.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Look, I've always been a fan of the Greater Bay Area. I have to say my personal preference is to focus more on the outbound opportunities than the inbound opportunities. I think that's where Hong Kong is more competitively positioned. I think our professional services firms in particular are really well equipped to help Greater Bay Area firms, many of which or a number of which are already Fortune 500 companies, to go global. And to help mitigate risk, of course, but also to capture the opportunities out there. And of course, border restrictions don't help. But, you know, even internally, we were having just this conversation the other day that as anticipation, the borders will open, that expected outflow of Chinese businesses looking to pick up or catch up to lost opportunities over the last few years could be quite significant. And that's where Hong Kong really is well positioned. And I think Southeast Asia in particular is where a lot of the excitement is. We don't actually have to go far. We can go to our backyard. And Dana, I'm interested because clearly your business does have a presence in Southeast Asia. The markets there have grown faster than China for the first time in 30 years. Vietnam in particular is a remarkable success story. It barely seemed to suffer a blip during the pandemic and is growing at gangbuster rates now. But clearly, you know, whether it's Indonesia or other markets, is also great excitement. And look, personal view, I'm not entirely convinced Southeast Asia can offset slower Chinese growth, but it can certainly at a firm level create some really exciting opportunities. Where in particular are you perhaps most excited about or focused on?
We have an office in Malaysia that covers the whole Southeast Asia countries. And also we have an office in Singapore for obvious reason, because there's a lot of mainland Chinese businessmen because of the language. There's no language barrier in Singapore because majority of the people who still speaks Mandarin or Chinese. So it's easy for them to do business or set up family offices or investment in Singapore. And that's where we have a presence there. But we are looking further afield into Australia, you know, New Zealand and places like that as well. You know, Hong Kong, actually, we are so geographically located that within 4 hours of flight, we cover most part of the Asian hub, right? And within 5 hours, we are touching half, of the world's population. So Hong Kong is just strategically located. And because Hong Kong, most of the trade is in US dollar, it's very easy for us to do business here. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And we hear a lot about Hong Kong acting as a bridge between China and the world. To be direct, simply acting as a bridge between China and Southeast Asia by itself should provide companies here with just fabulous opportunities and real scale. I'm interested, Stephen, we have focused on Southeast Asia particularly, but President Xi in his recent policy address did reference South-South, which of course is a much broader concept. It aligns very neatly with Belt and Road. We might hear a little bit more about South-South, a little bit about Belt and Road in the coming years for a variety of reasons. I'm wondering how you see Hong Kong's position as being able to capture some of those South-South opportunities.
Yeah, it's a good question. And as it happens, Invest Hong Kong for the first time is opening an office in Africa. So that is obviously partly recognizing the extent of that, or part of that South-South opportunity. And we see similar things with Latin America, where we also have a presence in 3 countries, in Chile, Peru, and Brazil. And what we tend to see is where there's been substantial mainland investment that goes in to one of these economies, we then start to see the flow back investment from their companies to Hong Kong to enter the mainland or to enter Asia more generally. So that's quite a notable trend. There's a time lag, but that's why we're opening in South America. That's why we're opening in Africa. And I'm not too sure, this is stretching South-South, but also we're seeing growing connectivity with Central Asia. And for that reason, actually, we've just opened in Kazakhstan as well, where again, we're seeing a bit of a shift. It's a little bit like the Middle East, with maybe more companies looking towards Hong Kong for a capital raise than traditionally where a resource company in Kazakhstan has looked to London. So there's some fundamental subtle shifts happening just on a constant basis.
That's super exciting. Correct me if I'm wrong too, not only Africa, but the Middle East, you're opening up a Invest Hong Kong office, which is just a sign of the times, right? Yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. And your analysis earlier on the Middle East side would agree with entirely. And that we see as a really good two-way opportunity. So both attracting Middle Eastern investment here into Hong Kong and the region, but we also see phenomenal opportunities for companies in Hong Kong, particularly if you look at, say, the reform agenda in Saudi Arabia, which is very bold indeed. And lots of the skills in financial and professional services, there's a very, very deep pool here.
And there's a pool as well of expatriate workers in Dubai who've either worked in Hong Kong or very familiar with the city. So there's some real warmth there, and understanding the advantages or the channels and way to which to cooperate with Hong Kong, which is again super exciting. Funny when you mentioned Kazakhstan. One of my more favorite places, Almaty, is a fabulous city. I was just earlier this week chatting with the Deputy Consul General at Kazakhstan, who made a remark that direct flights should resume soon, which again would just be very exciting, because I couldn't agree more. I know Kazakhstan is a long way from our traditional markets, but there are no doubt some real opportunities there, particularly as a gateway into Central Asia. So I'm looking forward to that, both from a business but also a personal perspective.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Diana, I wonder. I wonder what how do you see the role of Chinese enterprises in Hong Kong, particularly as they look to go outbound? again, I'm thinking about traditionally we've been a hub for foreign firms going inbound to China, but increasingly there may be a pivot. We may see more Chinese enterprises going out. Hong Kong should be a natural platform for them as a springboard into the rest of the region. What might be your reflections on that?
You are absolutely correct. Actually, most mainland Chinese successful companies, they also have a company here in Hong Kong. They use Hong Kong as a springboard to go abroad, not only because of the language, because majority of the Hong Kong people do speak English, and we have a great legal system. So, and there's so many professionals in Hong Kong. So that's the reason why they always choose Hong Kong as their second home. Let's put it that way. And most of them do have a Hong Kong, permanent residency. And because of the motherland, and because Hong Kong is a renminbi, what we call offshore center, so it's easier for them to conduct business in Hong Kong. And on top of that, people like to live in a country or in a territory where they are familiar with their own sort of, culture, food, etc. And if they have the choice, they always like to come to Hong Kong. And Hong Kong used to be the number one, according to them, is the most ideal place to live for any mainland Chinese people. They all want to come to Hong Kong. Yeah.
Ben, if I could add to that, we do a survey every year of international and mainland companies in Hong Kong. And the mainland has been number one for more than the last 6 or 7 years. The top 5, mainland, US, Japan, UK, and interestingly, the 5th is Singapore, which I always think is very interesting with the endless debate in some quarters about Hong Kong versus Singapore, that our friends in Singapore, a city not dissimilar in size to Hong Kong, think it's worthy enough to be our 5th largest source of investment. I think that says a lot about what the business opportunities are.
It really does, doesn't it? And in terms of, I wanted to stay on the theme of investment here. Stephen, I know the government has set up a Hong Kong Investment Corporation Limited, which is it could be quite a game changer. And I find it striking because, and again, not to harp too much on the Middle East, but the region's sovereign wealth funds have been very active investors in companies that they see are important to the strategic ambitions of whether it's the UAE or Saudi Arabia. And it feels like Hong Kong may be beginning to move in that direction, which I find intriguing. And I think the sort of the strategic ambition should be applauded. I don't know what your reflections on that might be.
Well, I think the analogy that you make to what we see, particularly in the Middle East on the sovereign wealth fund side, but generally globally, I think has some merit. Obviously, the Hong Kong Investment Corporation isn't a sovereign. Hong Kong is a special administrative region. But the intention is the capital within that will be used to support productive operating investment. This isn't about financial investment. It could be greenfield, or it could be expansion of an existing operating business. So to that extent, the parallels with what some of the sovereign wealth funds are doing, I think, is a good one.
And could I?
It's a big departure for Hong Kong.
It's a big departure for Hong Kong, and it'll be fascinating to see how it develops. I wish them all the best of luck on this. Can I also? I'd love to ask each of you, with your crystal ball looking forward, what would you like to see change in Hong Kong? Where would you like to see investment? What do you think is needed for the city to really to turbocharge its development? And I'll give you some time to think on this. I'm going to throw in my suggestion to begin with, and that is I'm actually personally a very big fan of the Northern Metropolis zone and building out our urban connectivity to our near neighbor. And the reason for that, we just ran a survey recently of Hong Kong nationals, asking them questions about their appetite to work across the border in the Greater Bay Area. And it's been fascinating to see how views have changed over the last few years. And it's no longer seen as a binary decision. You either live in Hong Kong or you live on the mainland. It's increasingly seen as a commuter opportunity. People would like to live in Hong Kong, but to work across the border. And for many of them, they would like a daily commute to be able to, say, work in the northern metropolis, to jump on the subway, to head across the border and within 45 minutes be at their place of work. And to me, that type of connectivity is going to become, increasingly important if we're going to find ways to collaborate going forward, Hong Kong and Shenzhen in particular. So would love to see that plan go forward. I think the government should perhaps put some thought into specifically targeting populations who are prepared to work across the border, who have an appetite to do that, to support the connectivity. But look, that would be my 2 cents for what it's worth. But keen, Stephen, to get some of your views on where you think we could improve or invest for the future.
I'd actually go back to one country, two systems, and where we're heading now with what Xi Jinping said in the policy address. I think it is that we really make the best of both one country and two systems and don't focus on one or the other because they're actually symbiotic. But I think so far, we've not always fully leveraged the one country part, perhaps sometimes be too focused on the two systems part. So I think getting that balance absolutely pitch perfect is really the way in which we're going to unleash the economic potential, whether it's a GBA, whether it's that outbound Chinese investment through Hong Kong to the rest of the world. It's really recognizing that Hong Kong has this special role to play in the context of one country.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw up a well-used word, but acting as a super connector between China and the world and navigating that system, fundamentally really important. Diana, what would your views be here?
Well, I echo with what Stephen just brought up. I think between the Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area, we are becoming a more cohesive, economy. Let's put it that way. And in terms of regulations, etc., they basically are trying to mimic Hong Kong. We know that foreigners or anybody who works in the Greater Bay Area, if they are from Hong Kong, you pay the Hong Kong tax, right? So, slowly there's going to be a cohesive, not only on the tax scheme, but also on the legislation. I mean, I understand someone is writing the Greater Bay Area law. So sooner or later, this will be in place, but also in aviation, because right now, if you goes across the border, you are entering into China airspace, but Hong Kong and Macau are not in talks with China about a cohesive airspace. So planes can come in and out much easier. So there are a lot of areas that we can collaborate and make the Greater Bay Area a more, attractive area to the foreign nationals who wants to invest. But also, that's one market I think we sometimes ignore is the silver hair market, because the Hong Kong and mainland Chinese people are getting, there's a huge aging population. But it's not only in our part of the world, but it's all over, the globe. And healthcare actually is very, very good in China. And a lot of people in Hong Kong, I know, they love to move to the Greater Bay Area and go into old age homes, etc. And in Hong Kong, we don't have the land to do that. But I'm sure, across the bay, you have that opportunity. And healthcare will be fantastic for elderly people. And there's a huge market for that. I have known some expatriates. They moved back to their own country. After COVID, they decided to move back to Hong Kong because of the healthcare system that we have here. So I think that's a huge market in the future for silver hair, I would say, generations.
Would agree with that. And I'm going to offer my own sort of slant as well. So I was speaking with the CEO of a Hong Kong health provider the other day. I won't mention which one, but it was quite interesting that he saw the opportunity in capturing that silver hair market who are prepared to come to Hong Kong to see specialists. He felt that actually it was quite difficult to build out a network of clinics across the border. So better to enter into joint venture arrangements where those clinics could perhaps provide some aftercare service. But ultimately, it was Hong Kong's pool of highly specialized doctors and others who would capture some of that inbound opportunity. And again, it almost comes back to the whole idea of a mobile population prepared to commute to either side of the border to find the right service, to sell the right service. And I think to the region's credit, we've spent a lot of money on infrastructure over the last few years. And that's helping to really turbocharge that mobility. From a personal perspective, I miss not traveling on that high-speed rail. That was just always a delight, the 15-minute ride from Hong Kong into Futian, into Shenzhen. Stephen, could I come back to you as we're beginning to near the end of our session? Would love to get a sense of where Invest Hong Kong is focused or is getting interest in terms of foreign companies looking to explore opportunities in Hong Kong.
I would say it's pretty balanced across the globe. We have teams in 33 locations with opening in Africa. That will have us in every continent apart from Antarctica. So what I would say is the more mature economies continue to show interest, but are more in the stable phase of growth, if you like. But if we look at ASEAN, if we look at the Middle East, if we look at South America, then those are growing much faster percentage-wise in terms of interest, but from a much lower base. And like any company, as an economy, we want to see a balanced portfolio of investment from around the world. What really is most important is actually the quality of that investment, the quality of the business, the jobs it creates, in economic development terms, the spillover effects into the wider economy, and all that good stuff. So it's less really about geography. It just happens that a lot of our work is done on a geographic basis, but it's more about really attracting the right, inverted commas, sort of companies.
It's super, and look, we can't, we can't have today's session and not mention talent, and there clearly is a battle for talent at the moment. Dana, can I ask you, is talent a concern for you for business owners operating in Hong Kong?
Yes, it was a concern during the COVID period, but I think I feel because there's quite a lot of expatriates moving back into the city. Because when they go home, they realize the glass is not really on the other side. So they are moving back. And a lot of corporations have extended the retirement age from 60 to, or maybe just come back to Hong Kong as a contractor, not as a full employee. So they don't get the same benefit, but still they get the same pay, etc. And life is so much easier. That's what all the expatriates told me here in Hong Kong. And they prefer to come back here. And before we go, I also one point I'd like to point out, for any investor that comes into Hong Kong and use Hong Kong as a base, any offshore income is not taxable in Hong Kong. So you make your contribution in Hong Kong and hiring the Hong Kong talents or the workforce, and you make your income outside of Hong Kong, from mainland China or somewhere else, your income is not taxable. This is one of the biggest benefits of opening a company here in Hong Kong. And tax is low if you have to pay tax.
Yeah, it's hard to overlook some of those advantages. I certainly spent 10 years as a business owner myself. having founded a company, and the tax setup here, the ease of business setup is just remarkable. And it will be a real attraction. Again, couldn't agree more in terms of expatriates beginning to trickle back into the city. You would expect that to become hopefully a flood at some point. There's some real attractions to living here, particularly when the rest of the world is perhaps more complex than it was a few months ago, a few years ago. So real reasons to be here. I think we've got a minute or so to go. Stephen, any sort of closing words?
Well, I think hopefully we've just in our discussion managed to get across to everybody that actually Hong Kong is really worth taking a really close look at. There's exciting things happening. I think in the period of COVID, a lot of really fundamental positive change has been taking place. So if anybody wants to have a chat about what it might mean for your business, I or my colleagues would love to tell you more.
Diana, final words?
I would invite people to come and invest here, because we have the best, system, and we have all the best professionals here in Hong Kong. And you have the ease of currency, because when you do transaction in different currency, it's so much easier here in Hong Kong. And and tax rate is fabulous.
I'd echo those comments. I think to anyone who hasn't had a chance to visit Hong Kong over the last few years, the media stories can be somewhat negative, but it's vastly exaggerate the situation here. Come back and you'll discover that it's just such a fabulous place.
Yeah, one thing you will always find, Hong Kong people are very accommodating, and we have the best service here, really. When you go somewhere else, when you come back to Hong Kong, you see the major difference when you do compare.
Couldn't agree more. So I think that brings our session to a close. Diana, Stephen, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to discuss with you today. And thank you to everyone who enjoyed the session. Please do stay online for the rest of the upcoming session. And I hope it's as insightful as I found it for much of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.